Before we begin, let me ask you something quietly. When pressure hits, real pressure, not the motivational kind, not the kind you post about, what happens inside your mind? When the situation spirals faster than you can control, when information is incomplete, when consequences are real and immediate, do you become clearer or noisier? Because panic is not loud on the outside. Panic is loud on the inside, and long before a person breaks publicly, they fracture privately. This is not a talk about calm as a personality trait. It is about calm as a trained response. Because the Stoics, and this is something many people misunderstand, did not believe calm was natural. They believed calm was earned. Earned through repetition, earned through discipline, earned through the refusal to surrender judgment when circumstances become hostile. 2,000 years ago, the Stoics were not monks or professors removed from consequence. They were soldiers, statesmen, slaves, prisoners, emperors. They lived with stakes. Marcus Aurelius ruled during plague, famine, flood, and nearly constant war. Seneca navigated political paranoia under Nero, knowing execution was always possible. Epictetus was born a slave, physically disabled, and lived under absolute power he did not control. None of them preached optimism. They preached clarity under pressure, and clarity is the opposite of panic. Panic narrows perception. Clarity sharpens it. Panic accelerates reaction. Clarity delays judgment just enough to choose well. The Stoics understood something modern psychology now confirms. You do not rise to the occasion. You default to your training. That is why panic is so dangerous, not because it is emotional, but because it hands control to impulse. The Stoics called this assent. Every moment an impression enters your mind. Something happens. Someone speaks. A situation deteriorates, and between the event and your reaction, there is a fraction of time. That fraction is where freedom lives. Most people give it away. The Stoics did not. Epictetus taught that the single most important skill in life is learning to pause before agreeing with your first impression. Not everything that feels urgent is urgent. Not everything that feels threatening is dangerous. Not everything that feels personal actually is. Marcus Aurelius wrote this reminder to himself repeatedly, because even as emperor, he felt the pull of panic. He did not deny it. He trained against it. Early in Meditations, Marcus reminds himself that people will be difficult, selfish, and unreasonable. This is not pessimism. It is preemptive emotional control. When you expect friction, it loses its power to shock you. Panic thrives on surprise. Preparation starves it. This is why Stoic calm begins before the crisis. The Marines do not train for comfort. They train for chaos. The Stoics trained the mind the same way. Marcus did not wait for crisis to decide who he would be inside it. He rehearsed mentally. Today you will encounter confusion. Today you will encounter ignorance. Today you will encounter resistance. None of these are new. None of these are personal. You are here to do your job. This concept, do your job, is deeply Stoic. Not the job you want, not the job that gets applause, the job required by the moment. Seneca warned that panic often comes from wanting circumstances to be different instead of meeting them as they are. The Stoic does not argue with reality. He adapts to it. This is where the famous Stoic principle emerges. You do not control what happens. You control how you respond. That sounds simple. It is not, because when pressure hits, the ego intervenes. Ego wants recognition. Ego wants control. Ego wants to be right, admired, validated. Panic often isn't fear. It is wounded ego scrambling for dominance. Ryan Holiday speaks about this directly when he identifies ego as the real enemy, not external threats. The Stoics said the same thing centuries earlier. Epictetus warned that you cannot learn what you think you already know. Ego freezes growth. Ego blocks correction. Ego resists humility, and humility is required for clarity. Marcus feared ego more than failure. Failure could be corrected. Ego blinded correction. That is why he constantly reminded himself of his own smallness. You are a temporary thing. Your power is temporary. Your body is temporary. This was not self-hatred. It was grounding. Panic often comes from believing too much depends on you personally. The Stoics reduced this burden. Do what is yours to do. Leave the rest. This mindset saved Marcus during plague. The Antonine Plague killed millions. There was no cure, no understanding, no relief. Marcus could not stop it, but he could govern justly. He could remain rational. He could prevent cruelty born of fear. That was his job, and so he did it. This is where the Stoic idea of the obstacle is the way emerges, not as motivation, but as orientation. What blocks action forces adaptation. What resists progress strengthens capacity. What tests character reveals it. Marcus did not become great despite adversity. He became great because adversity demanded discipline. Panic would have destroyed him. So he trained against it daily. Morning preparation, mental rehearsal, emotional restraint, evening reflection. Not heroism, routine. This is what most people miss. The Stoics were not reactive, they were methodical. They did not chase intensity. They built resilience quietly. And that is where we begin. Once pressure arrives, most people believe the problem is the situation itself. The Stoics disagreed. They believed the true danger begins after the event, inside the interpretation. Panic is not caused by chaos. Panic is caused by the belief that chaos must not exist. This belief is rarely conscious. It hides beneath words like, "This shouldn't be happening," "This isn't fair," or "I can't handle this." Marcus Aurelius understood this intimately. As emperor, he lived in a state of permanent contingency. War plans collapsed, allies defected, natural disasters struck without warning, Messages arrived late. Information was incomplete. Decisions had to be made anyway. He did not panic because he did not expect certainty. One of the most radical Stoic ideas is this: clarity does not require certainty. Most panic comes from demanding guarantees in a world that never offered them. The Stoics removed that demand. Epictetus taught that when you attach your peace to outcomes, you become fragile. When you attach it to conduct, you become resilient. Marcus trained himself to ask a different question than most leaders. Not, will this work? But, is this the right action given what I know now? That shift is subtle and transformative. Because outcomes are unstable, principles are not. This allowed Marcus to act decisively without emotional escalation. Decisiveness without panic is rare. Most decisiveness is fueled by fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of appearing weak, fear of losing control. Stoicism stripped fear of its authority. Fear was acknowledged, but not obeyed. Another source of panic the Stoics identified was ego under threat. When something goes wrong, panic often isn't about danger, it's about identity. What will this say about me? How will I look? What if I lose status? Marcus addressed this directly in his writings. He reminded himself repeatedly that reputation is external. It does not belong to you. You cannot secure it. You cannot defend it permanently. To panic over reputation is to surrender your mind to others. Seneca warned that a person who lives for approval lives in captivity. Marcus refused that captivity. This freed him to act rationally under criticism. He could be blamed. He could be misunderstood. He could be disliked. None of these justified panic. Another Stoic practice that neutralized panic was voluntary discomfort. This is deeply misunderstood today. The Stoics did not pursue hardship to feel superior. They practiced controlled discomfort to remove fear of discomfort. Seneca recommended occasionally sleeping on the floor, eating plain food, wearing simple clothes, and asking oneself, is this what I feared? By rehearsing adversity voluntarily, the Stoics disarmed panic. Marcus lived this naturally. Military life forced simplicity. Campaigns stripped luxury. Illness weakened comfort. Instead of resisting these conditions, Marcus accepted them as training. When discomfort is familiar, it loses its power to alarm. Panic feeds on novelty. Familiarity starves it. Another critical Stoic insight was this: speed is the enemy of judgment. Panic accelerates. Clarity slows. Not action, but reaction. Marcus trained delay. When provoked, he did not respond immediately. When anger rose, he paused. When fear appeared, he examined it. Epictetus taught that impressions are automatic. Assent is not. The moment you feel panic is not failure. Failure occurs when you agree with it unquestioningly. Marcus practiced refusing immediate assent. He asked, "What is this, really? Is this as serious as it feels? Will panic improve my response?" The answer was always no. Panic never improves judgment. It narrows options. It reduces empathy. It accelerates mistakes. Marcus understood that calm is not passive. Calm is tactical. Another dimension of panic the Stoics identified was attachment to control. Modern culture teaches control as safety. The Stoics taught surrender as strength. Not surrender of effort, surrender of illusion. You cannot control events. You cannot control other people. You cannot control timing. You can control intention. You can control effort. You can control restraint. Marcus wrote that trying to control the uncontrollable is a form of madness. Madness produces panic. Acceptance produces clarity. This acceptance did not make Marcus indifferent. It made him effective, because energy previously wasted on resistance was redirected toward action. Another element of Stoic anti-panic discipline was perspective. Marcus frequently zoomed out mentally. He reminded himself of time, of scale, of how small today's crisis would appear from a distance. This was not minimization, it was recalibration. When everything feels urgent, nothing can be prioritized. Perspective restores hierarchy. Marcus wrote about viewing events from above, seeing cities as specks, generations passing, empires fading. This exercise dissolved panic by shrinking its perceived size. Fear thrives in isolation. Perspective reconnects context. Another Stoic method was language discipline. Marcus warned himself not to exaggerate, not to say, "This is unbearable," when it is merely uncomfortable. Not to say, "This is catastrophic," when it is merely difficult. Words shape perception. Inflated language inflates emotion. Precise language preserves control. This is profoundly relevant today. Modern discourse thrives on amplification. Stoicism insists on accuracy. Another critical factor in Marcus's resistance to panic was routine, not rigidity, reliability. When external conditions are unstable, routine anchors the nervous system. Marcus's days followed a rhythm even during war. Reflection, action, correction. This rhythm provided continuity when circumstances did not. Panic thrives in chaos. Routine introduces order. Finally, Marcus understood that panic often emerges from fatigue. Exhausted minds catastrophize. He protected rest. He understood that discipline without recovery collapses. This is rarely acknowledged in discussions of resilience. The Stoics were not ascetics who glorified burnout. They valued sustainability. Marcus rested when possible. He slept when he could. He conserved energy deliberately, because clarity requires capacity, and capacity must be maintained. By the end of each day, Marcus did not ask whether he had succeeded. He asked whether he had acted in accordance with reason. This reframed evaluation. Success became ethical, not external. And ethical success does not panic. It endures. There comes a point where pressure is no longer theoretical, no longer professional, no longer manageable by technique alone. It becomes existential. This is the kind of pressure Marcus Aurelius lived with for years. Not brief emergencies, not isolated crises, sustained exposure to danger, uncertainty, and loss. He governed during prolonged war. He lived through plague that killed millions. He watched children die. He ruled knowing that his decisions could not be undone. This is the terrain where panic feels justified. And yet, Marcus insisted, panic is never useful. Not because the situation is mild, but because panic adds chaos where clarity is required most. The Stoics understood something brutal but honest. There is no situation so bad that panic improves it. Fear may be unavoidable. Panic is optional. The difference matters. Fear is an involuntary response. Panic is fear that has been given authority. The Stoics trained themselves to feel fear without surrendering command. Epictetus taught that courage is not the absence of fear, but obedience to reason in its presence. Marcus lived this daily. When war stretched on without resolution, he did not indulge despair. He did not demand reassurance from the future. He narrowed his focus. What is required now? Not tomorrow, not the outcome, not the legacy. Now. This narrowing of temporal focus is a core Stoic anti-panic strategy. Panic lives in imagined futures. Stoic clarity lives in the present obligation. Marcus wrote that if you attend fully to the present task, the future loses its power to intimidate. This was not denial. It was discipline. Another extreme pressure Marcus faced was irreversibility. Many of his decisions could not be corrected. Lives depended on them. Modern anxiety often comes from imagined stakes. Marcus's stakes were real. And yet, he did not freeze. Why? Because Stoicism reframed responsibility. Marcus did not hold himself responsible for outcomes. He held himself responsible for process. Did I deliberate honestly? Did I act justly? Did I respond proportionally? If yes, then the outcome belonged to fate. This separation prevented paralysis. Paralysis often comes from trying to carry what no human can carry: omniscience. The Stoics rejected omniscience. They embraced sufficiency. Do what reason allows, accept what it does not. Another moment where panic commonly arises is mortality made visible. Plague did this brutally. Death was not abstract. It was present. It was daily. Marcus did not hide from this. He confronted it deliberately. Memento mori was not a slogan. It was a stabilizing practice. You could leave life right now, Marcus reminded himself. Let that determine what you do and say and think. This was not morbid fixation. It was prioritization. When death is acknowledged, trivial panic dissolves. Petty fear loses relevance. Only essential action remains. The Stoics believed that fear of death fuels much panic. Once death is accepted as natural, fear loses leverage. Epictetus was blunt. You cannot escape death. You can escape cowardice. Marcus internalized this. He did not rush toward danger recklessly, but he did not let fear dictate action. Another extreme stressor Marcus endured was moral exhaustion. Years of command wear down restraint. Compassion fatigue sets in. Cynicism tempts. Here, Stoicism served as protection against cruelty. Marcus reminded himself repeatedly that other people's failures were not personal attacks. They were expressions of ignorance. This interpretation preserved empathy under strain. Panic often dehumanizes. Clarity humanizes. By refusing to see others as enemies of his peace, Marcus reduced internal conflict. Another crucial Stoic concept relevant here is the inner citadel. Marcus wrote that a person can retreat inwardly at any time.
This retreat is not withdrawal from responsibility. It is insulation from chaos. Even in war, even amid noise, even amid fear, the mind can remain ordered. This idea is central to Stoic resilience. External conditions may be uncontrollable. Internal judgment is not. This is not metaphor. It is practice. Marcus rehearsed this retreat daily. He reminded himself that insults do not reach the mind unless invited, that fear does not command unless obeyed, that panic is an internal decision. This did not make him emotionless, it made him sovereign. Another moment panic arises is when everything feels meaningless. Extended suffering erodes purpose. Marcus confronted this honestly. He did not pretend that life was fair. He did not promise himself reward. Instead, he anchored meaning in conduct. To act justly is meaning. To act with restraint is meaning. To do one's duty is meaning. This is a radical position. It removes meaning from outcome entirely. When meaning is internal, panic loses its threat. You cannot lose what depends only on you. Another aspect of Marcus's resilience was historical humility. He reminded himself constantly that empires rise and fall, that his reign would pass, that his name would fade. This was not nihilism, it was relief. If history does not depend on you, panic subsides, the ego relaxes, duty remains. Marcus did not attempt to be remembered. He attempted to be correct. That distinction preserved sanity. As years passed, his health declined. Pain increased. Still, his discipline remained. Morning preparation, mental restraint, focused action, evening review. This routine was not inspirational, it was stabilizing. Stability is underrated. In extreme conditions, stability is survival. Marcus Aurelius did not avoid crisis. He inhabited it without surrendering himself to it. That is the Stoic art of not panicking. At the end of all Stoic discipline, there is no promise of comfort. There is clarity. Marcus Aurelius never believed that life would become easier. He believed something more demanding, that the mind could become stronger than circumstances. This is where modern culture often misunderstands Stoicism. Stoicism is not calm music over chaos. It is not emotional suppression. It is not detachment from responsibility. It is mental sovereignty, the refusal to hand control of judgment to fear. By the final years of his life, Marcus Aurelius had no illusions left. He knew the empire would strain. He knew wars would continue. He knew his body was failing. And yet, his writings grew simpler, more precise, less theatrical, less hopeful, and more grounded. He no longer asked the world to cooperate with his desires. He asked himself to cooperate with reality. That is the Stoic shift. Once you stop negotiating with what is, panic loses oxygen. Because panic is a negotiation tactic. It is the mind saying, if I react strongly enough, maybe this will go away. But reality does not respond to intensity. It responds to action. The Stoics trained themselves to separate urgency from importance. Not everything urgent matters. Not everything important feels urgent. Panic confuses the two. Marcus disciplined his attention ruthlessly. What is mine to do? What is not? This question, repeated daily, is the foundation of Stoic calm. Epictetus stated it plainly. Freedom begins when you draw a clear boundary around what depends on you. Inside that boundary, effort is required. Outside it, acceptance is required. Confusing these domains produces panic. Clarity restores peace. Another essential Stoic insight is that panic often masquerades as care. People panic because they care deeply about outcomes, about people, about consequences. Stoicism does not ask you to care less. It asks you to care more intelligently. Caring without discipline leads to burnout. Caring with discipline leads to endurance. Marcus loved his family deeply. He loved his duty. He loved justice. But he did not allow love to distort judgment. He accepted that loss is the price of attachment. This acceptance did not weaken love. It purified it. Another truth the Stoics understood is that panic is contagious. Leaders who panic amplify fear. Parents who panic transmit insecurity. Individuals who panic fracture teams. Calm, by contrast, stabilizes. Marcus Aurelius became a source of stability, not because he had answers, but because he did not escalate uncertainty. This is why Stoicism remains relevant to leadership today. Not because leaders must be emotionless, but because they must be regulated. Emotional regulation is not repression, it is command. The Stoics practiced this command daily. They trained their language, they trained their thoughts, they trained their reactions. Marcus warned himself not to say, "This is unbearable," when it was merely difficult. Language shapes experience. Inflated language inflates panic. Precise language restores proportion. Another Stoic discipline that neutralized panic was gratitude without illusion. Marcus reminded himself daily of what still functioned: his reason, his capacity to choose, his ability to act justly. This was not toxic positivity. It was inventory. When panic rises, inventory restores balance. What remains intact? That question matters more than what is broken. The Stoics also understood that panic often comes from isolation, the belief that you are alone in suffering. Marcus countered this by remembering that human experience is shared. Others before you have endured this. Others after you will endure it. You are not singled out. This perspective dissolves self-pity. Self-pity fuels panic. Perspective dissolves it. By the end of his life, Marcus Aurelius had refined his philosophy into something almost stark. Do what is right, accept what follows. Do not dramatize either. This is not resignation. It is strength without ornament. The Stoics did not believe life owed them meaning. They created meaning through conduct. And conduct does not panic. It acts. If you take nothing else from this reflection, take this. Panic is not a failure of courage. It is a failure of preparation. The Stoics prepared daily, not for success, for difficulty. They rehearsed adversity mentally. They examined impressions. They disciplined language. They corrected themselves nightly. This made calm available under pressure. Not guaranteed, available. That availability is everything. Because when panic is absent, choice returns. And where choice exists, dignity survives. If you have followed this to the end, you are not looking for entertainment. You are looking for orientation, a way to stand when certainty disappears. That is what Stoicism offers. Not answers, alignment. If this way of thinking resonates, you may choose to remain in this dialogue, not out of habit, but out of intention. You may subscribe not as a gesture, but as a signal that depth still matters. You may share this with one person whose judgment you respect, someone who would not skim it, but sit with it. And if you leave a thoughtful comment, you do something increasingly rare. You acknowledge the work of careful study, reflection, and synthesis. That acknowledgement sustains conversations that do not shout, manipulate, or simplify. Whatever you decide, remember this. You do not need to control events. You need to command your response. That is the Stoic art of not panicking. And it remains available in every moment you choose clarity over impulse.